What is the result of the hearings, and do you find what the Vatican has done adequate?
Well, it seems as though the Vatican officials continue to split hairs and try to dodge responsibility. They claim to not have the authority to stop the sexual violence, and we are convinced that they do, and that they are making lofty statements, but they're not really taking action that would protect children.
And the sheer numbers that they revealed, $2.5 billion that they say has been paid in compensation, and 800 priests. Could you respond to that?
Well, I think it's really important to recognize that numbers are not going to protect children. We would say, what are the names of these individual predators and where are they today? That kind of information is what would protect children. And we continue to receive reports that sexual predators remain in ministry. We think that Pope Francis and the Vatican should immediately remove all the sexual predators. And we think that they should be punishing the bishops who have transferred these predators and enabled them.
Can you talk about how broad, widespread the problem is? The numbers of priests that they've expelled, that they've punished, and the number of people that you think are involved?
Well, there's no way of really knowing completely how many. The church's own officials will admit to approximately 100,000 victims in the United States alone, but we believe there are many more. And our concern is that we keep hearing reports that priests who have been allegedly removed from ministry, keep turning up, working in ministry in a new location. And so we are not confident that children are not at risk. In fact, we believe there are children and vulnerable adults who are being raped and sodomized even today.
Barbara, can you tell us your own story, why you founded SNAP? What happened to you?
Well, when I was growing up over in Toledo, Ohio, the priest in my parish began to sexually violate me in the summer between 7th and 8th grade. I didn't tell anyone till I was well into adulthood, assumed it was my fault, and at the same time felt helpless to stop it. But it wasn't until I was into my 30s before I really went back to the church officials and tried to confront and face this. And when they didn't help me, I started looking for other victims, and this was the 1980s, and there was a self-help group for everyone then. So we had a theory that we would just find each other and figure out how to find healing. Unfortunately, what we learned is that many of our perpetrators were still in ministry, and the church officials had really duped us into keeping us from law enforcement and promised that our perpetrators would be removed from ministry, when in fact that is not what happened.
Catherine Gallagher, I wanted to ask you, this is a scandal that has been being exposed now for decades, and it continues to grow in size. The significance of now the United Nations Committee on Torture taking up this issue on the world scale.
Yeah, we consider what happened this week quite historic. As you indicated, this is the second time this year that a UN body has called the Vatican to account for its actions, and bringing it to the international level is really the appropriate place. As Barbara pointed out, this is a global problem, and it requires a global response. SNAP has heard from victims in 79 countries. And for far too long, these acts have been called sexual abuse or inappropriate touching. The actions have been minimized. What we're hoping comes out of the Committee Against Torture is recognizing these acts for what they are: international crimes, torture, cruel and inhuman degrading treatment, and that in doing so, it both validates what has been done to the survivors, the victims, the profound harm as well as carries with it some of the legal triggers of recognizing torture in terms of national prosecutions or even international action.
And this becomes possible because the Vatican only recently signed the Convention on Torture, isn't it?
Well, the Vatican actually signed the convention 12 years ago. As most countries come to report every 3 or 4 years, the Vatican was 9 years late in putting in its first report. SNAP and the Center for Constitutional Rights went to the International Criminal Court in 2011, and since that time, we have seen international focus put on this issue and a real recharacterization of the problem as isolated to certain countries or, again, just sexual abuse, and really recognizing it for the global crimes that it is, and the role of the higher-ups in the Vatican for enabling these crimes.
What does it mean that the Holy See's position about adherence to the UN Convention against Torture applies only to the territory of Vatican City?
Yes, this is something that we heard the Vatican press both before the Committee on the Rights of the Child and the Committee Against Torture, saying, okay, the Vatican has signed on to these treaties, but it's really only that small territory in Rome that the obligations apply to. Both committees pressed back on that and said no, anywhere where the Vatican has effective control over high-level officials such as bishops and cardinals, where the policies and practices of the Vatican can be carried out. And unfortunately, what we've seen so far is that those policies have been to cover up these crimes, to obstruct justice, to encourage secrecy and confidentiality. And hopefully what we'll be seeing now is clear instructions from the Committee Against Torture that anywhere where you have effective control over church officials, they must, in fact, comply with national authorities' mandatory reporting requirements. They must turn over known suspected priests who've engaged in acts of rape and sexual violence and really put an end to these crimes.
Well, some of the groups that attended the UN torture hearings in Geneva defended the Catholic Church. They said that the church is now a safe place for children. Ashley McGuire serves on the board of Catholic Voices USA.
Now actually become one of the safest places for children in the world. I think it's certainly a source of great sadness what happened with the sexual abuse crisis, but we're in a different era now. And not only that, but the church is doing very important work on the front lines, defending and helping children, helping women who are in difficult situations. And it would actually endanger them, I think, were this committee to label them essentially a sponsor of torture.
That was Ashley McGuire of Catholic Voices. Barbara Blaine, your response.
Well, I just think that that is just not true. The evidence shows that, I mean, she cannot and has not shown even one bishop who has been punished for covering up these crimes and allowing these predators to remain in ministry. I mean, if Pope Francis were sincere and if he wanted to protect children, we believe that he would punish the bishops. For example, right now, there is a bishop in Kansas City who has been found guilty of endangering children, and he's still the bishop. And so when the Catholic Church officials claim that they have cleaned everything up, we keep saying, but where is the evidence of that? And we're not finding it. And in fact, we're finding just the opposite. It was only a couple years ago that a grand jury report from Philadelphia indicated that the grand jurors had found 37 accused predators working in ministry within the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And that's actually one of the questions that the committee put to the Vatican officials. And as far as I heard, I did not hear any response to that question. And they asked specific questions, for example, about Father Jayapal, a priest, an Indian national who had abused children in a diocese in northern Minnesota. And he is still facing extradition and has not returned to face the charges in Minnesota. And the church officials have been assisting him in his role as a fugitive and not insisting that he return to face those charges.
Barbara, what do you recommend as a survivor yourself How do parents and kids deal who go to church to protect themselves?
Well, I think it's really important that parents remain vigilant. It's like in so many situations, no one wants to believe that someone that we revere and respect, someone who's close to God, would actually sexually violate someone. And by all means, most priests don't do this, but an alarming number of, the church officials at the Archbishop Tomasi admitted approximately 4%, and the statistics coming out from the U.S. Conference of Bishops would indicate it's probably a little over 5%, but still, I think it's important that they remain vigilant, and I think it's really important that Pope Francis stop having all these lofty words and setting up a commission to study. We don't need studies. Everyone knows that sexually violating a child it's a crime. And those things should be turned over to the police and not investigated in the church. And we should stop coddling and protecting the predators.
Catherine Gallagher, I want to raise a question about the failures of law enforcement in so many of these countries to actually pursue what is in effect crimes. Generally speaking, the local archbishop in any community is a major figure, a powerful figure in a particular locality. And yet, time and again, the authorities have not really gone after in a systematic way this scandal and these abuses.
No, that is definitely true. We've seen that slightly change in some jurisdictions here in the United States, and I would have to give credit to SNAP and other survivors who have really brought this problem to the attention of district attorneys and continue to press for investigations and prosecutions. But in far too many places around the world, particularly in Latin America, in Asia and Africa, where we don't hear about as many cases, it's not because there isn't a problem. It's because we don't have the investigations going on. We don't have the prosecutions and the national commissions. So I would call on law enforcement and national authorities to be much more vigilant and much more aggressive in investigating and prosecuting these cases, and to not bow to the pressures of putting forward what may be seen as unpopular cases in some areas.
Catherine, we're going to link to your report, shadow report that you prepared for the UN Committee Against Torture. But what most surprised you in these findings? Among them, you talk about suicide.
Yeah. The acts of torture documented in our report with cover art by Megan Peterson, a survivor, quite powerful work. The profound, I was mentioning, torture includes the profound, severe mental harm, and we talk about survivors, but there are many people who have not survived these horrific acts. In Australia, they just found 40 cases of suicide because you lose your family in many cases, your friends, your community, the isolation and the guilt, the victim blaming. This leads far too many people to take their own lives. And the church often refers to these as crimes of the past. We met with a survivor in Switzerland who himself was assaulted when he was preteen, and his 8-year-old sister came home from school in the 1970s reporting that she too had been raped. Just last year, she took her own life after decades of trying to battle this problem and living with the long-standing harm. So it's really devastating, and we're very glad that the Committee Against Torture is looking at this with the seriousness it needs.
Well, Catherine